Hello, everyone. This is JD Calderon, and this is Indy Comics Explained. And yet again, I brought on another fantastic guest, another great independent creator. But please, before we bring him on, hit like, hit subscribe, share out the video, let everybody know we're here, and subscribe to the channel. It always helps. Thank you. So, without further ado, our
Hey.
guest. How are you doing, Andre?
Good.
Please, what is it? Just let us know a little bit about yourself. I mean, what websites we can reach you at, that sort of thing. Just before we start.
Sure. Well, the main website that we have that I have is theshepherdcomic.com. That focuses on the Shepherd original graphic novel series that I have published with my son as a co-creator, co-writer. My son Roberto works with me on that. And also now my daughter, actually, as of last year, has worked as both editor and co-writer on one of the Shepherd stories. So I guess that's I shouldn't forget her as well.
Nice.
But you can find us. I normally use primarily Instagram, the Shepherd Comic, and then the same address for Facebook, the Shepherd Comic. I'm on Twitter as well, but I tend to share to that. It's not one of my primary that I use for myself.
Gotcha. All right, cool. So here, I got a question for you. I asked this one to everyone, and it's one of these funky questions that I think a lot of people ask, but I just like the question. Okay. So, Andre, when you were young Andre, right? I'm not interested in your first comic, right? Because we all had one of those, but I'm interested in the comic that you read, or even the work. It doesn't even have to necessarily be a comic. What's the work that drove you when you read it? You said, you know what? I want to do this. I want to write. What's that work that inspired that in you?
Wow, that is a great question. I would say, first of all, I don't think writing, the inspiration to write, it wasn't a comic book that did that, because I don't think I ever thought that I would write comic books. Like if I were to go back, my 12-year-old self would be thrilled to learn what I'm doing now, but it's not something I dared to imagine. In terms of writing,
what's up, Larry?
Writing books, I'm not. That's a really good question. I'm not really sure. I definitely loved writing and wanted to write, but I don't know that I could narrow it down to one particular book that did it for me, that pushed me in that direction. I mean, I had definitely my favorites, growing up. I've always had this love affair with Charles Dickens' The Christmas Carol. Okay. I just think that's an amazing book. And if you think about it, it's the idea of ghost stories and otherworldly travels and that type of thing is very much entrenched in the Shepherd. So I think that might be, if I were to isolate one, that might be it.
Gotcha. So here you go. So who was your, well, obviously you just mentioned Charles Dickens. Other than Charles Dickens, who's another writer would you consider to be someone that you looked up to, that you would advise someone to really read?
Well, Shakespeare for sure. Just the number of great stories produced. And again, the scholars question that, were all those produced by one person? You can get into the weeds, which I'm not going to do. But that body of work, Edgar Allan Poe, for sure. Another one. Nathaniel Hawthorne. Those are, just some of the ones that spring to mind. And then, certainly some of the ancient writers, because of my scholarly career, the ancient writers certainly played a major role for me. I don't know if you ever heard of him before, but there's a 2nd century satirist, Lucian of Samosata. And as a satirist, so he's like Bill Maher. Think Bill Maher, but in the 2nd century.
Nice.
And he writes a series of like scalding like essays talking about religious beliefs of the time period, you know, kind of making fun of them, and they still read extremely well to this day. I find them very amusing, but I also love the history writers, Polybius, Tacitus, Suetonius, Julius Caesar is great to read. That makes me sound like a complete egghead, I suppose.
No, listen, it's fine. I find it. I mean, listen, when I talk about it, right, I talk about my favorite literary heroes, right? I'm talking about Asimov, Heinlein, you know, Fritz Lieber, you know, those guys, Roger Zelazny, you know, and yeah. So, but to hear these names, I mean, that's fascinating because it's a different route, because it definitely brings you into a different world of thought.
Yeah.
Right. And that's important, especially, you know, I mean, we as writers, especially as we grow older and we start looking deeper, right? We have to try to explore different worlds, you know, different worldviews. And guys who existed 2,000 years ago definitely had a different worldview.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no doubt,
right?
No doubt about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, yeah, no, that's fascinating. So,
but there's lots of, yeah, there it is.
Yeah, Larry says Andrea almost published the Army with Caliber Comics. Interesting. I don't know. That's Larry from Night.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I mean, you know, just digging into it. Like, I know you ended up at Caliber for a while, right? How did that relationship begin with Caliber and with you becoming an editor?
Okay, so 2 parts of that question. How did it start with Caliber? So when I first did The Shepherd, we finished it and we were looking for a publisher. And we sent that thing out to about 40 different publishers. And mostly what we got was a lot of crickets.
Right.
And which is not unusual.
No.
And I shared this story because of those people who may be submitting to publishers and wondering. A lot of times there's a good reason why you're not getting a response, but unfortunately the publishers don't tell you why they're not interested. There could be something glaring. It could be that they have a title that's too close to it, or one in development that's too close to it. It could be that they have just a limited slate of books that they want to put out, and you know, they kind of have their lineup set. In my case, the few publishers that had said anything to me about it said something that they were basically consistent, and they were pointing to the lettering. And now, knowing what I know, the lettering was just amateur. It was just that simple. It was just not good. It was not professional quality lettering. It's one of the things that is the most common element about independent comics is that you have the writer who goes, well, I can letter it myself. Yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
You do it well, but you certainly can letter it yourself.
Yeah.
So I said, I went to a person who I hired to edit the book, who was a comic book person to edit. And he also recommended that we re-letter it. So I said, okay, we'll pay to have it re-lettered. Jacob Baskala was the gentleman that we paid to re-letter it. He did. Once we had it re-lettered and we kind of gave it the editorial once over, we sent it back out. Now you need to understand that I had sent it to Caliber in June of 2014 and gotten no response. I felt that Caliber might be a good fit for us because of the kinds of things that they were doing. So I said, well, in December, now that we got it re-lettered and it really looked a lot better. And then, you know, the editing that we had done, I said, why don't we take another shot at Caliber? Let's take a shot at this. Cause I had a good feeling about them the first time. So I did. And now that it had been re-lettered, 2 days after I sent it in, I got an email from Gary Reed, who is the publisher of Caliber. And he said, you know, because I had sent him issue 1. And he said, well, do you have more of this? And I said, yeah, it's all completed. And I sent it all to him. 2 days after that, he had a contract and he sent me a contract by email. So that we were offered the contract, which we signed at the end of December of 2014. So we ended up being rolled out by Caliber in May of 2015. So we did 5 years with them. So that's how we ended up at Caliber. Now, the other part of the question you asked was about how did editing come about?
Right.
So, Gary, I really liked Gary Reed. I really liked Gary Reed. I was very impressed by him as a writer because if you know anything about Gary Reed, he wrote lots of different kinds of things. So, for example, he would write horror very well, but he would also turn around and write crime. And actually, my favorite of all the things that I have read, and I've read quite a bit of Gary's work, my favorite thing was this one-off that he did called The Scarecrow. And The Scarecrow, if you can imagine Zorro, the character Zorro, but set in the American Revolution. Okay. It's a really good book. And it's my favorite. It's black and white, it's kind of the 90s vibe to it. But the story is really good, and it's a cool idea. This kind of like man who's like trying to protect the people. He's not really getting involved in the war aspect so much as he's trying to protect the populace from the redcoats. And I thought that was a really neat idea that had lots of potential as a kind of an unpowered superhero, but set in this marvelous historical period. So I admired him, and we had these chats, but all the chats you need to understand with Gary were always by email. Like he didn't do phone. So I had these amazing conversations with him, but all of them were always email.
Right.
And in one of the conversations, I mentioned about how I'd sent the book to 40 publishers, and I was surprised that so few had, even wrote an email saying, go kill yourself, it's just get out of here, leave us alone. You literally didn't even get the denial. You just got nothing,
Right.
And I asked him about that. And he said, well, what you need to understand about a small publisher like Caliber and like many of these ones that you're talking about is that submissions is really only one of 100 things that I have to do in my role. And when he said that, I wrote back to him. I said, well, my background, I have a doctorate in literature. I have an undergrad degree in journalism. I said, I could easily, you could send me these submissions. I could go through them, evaluate them for you, and then send them back. I said, I could look at the story. I could, read them, look at the story, evaluate the art, make suggestions. And he said, oh, that would be a great idea. But then he didn't do anything. He didn't do anything. This is a conversation we're having, by the way, in the early part of 2018.
Right.
Okay. So time had gone by, and he hadn't done anything. So I reminded him, I said, you said you would send them to me, but you never did. And he ended up sending me an email with a Dropbox link to it that had something like 30 or 40 submissions all in one shot that he dropped in my lap. And between us, JD, I think this was his way of going, fuck off.
Right. He's like, here you go, buddy.
Idea. You have no idea what you're asking for, but here it is.
Say, have fun.
Yeah. So, but what he failed to take into consideration is that I had been a university professor for years at this point. For years. I had 12 and a half years of working as a university professor, 7.5 of that at the grad school level. So what he sent me was just an ordinary one class at midterms, not even final. So I was like, okay, fine. So I did an evaluation, a page evaluation on each one of the properties and had it back to him within 4 days. And that changed everything because now he knew that I wasn't playing, that I was dead serious, and I was fully capable. And what I was doing that was different was I wasn't just going, black and white on this. So in other words, I wasn't just taking a property and saying yes or no. I was saying, because here's the thing, is that some of these properties come in and they just need some help.
Right.
Like I told you, the most common problem for an independent comic book is bad lettering. Bad lettering, as I'm sure are well aware, it can ruin the look of a book. It can ruin it. It's like buying a brand new car and then mud bogging with it. It just ruins, you might have really nice art and it just ruins it. So, it can be something as simple as this needs to be relettered. But if we were to reletter it like The Shepherd, it was worthy to be published. It just needed to be relettered.
Right.
So I did that with each of those 30 or 40, or however many it was, properties. And, and I made recommendations, and I just said, I think that there are a number of these properties that if we would just give them some tender loving care, we could sign them and publish them. And we'd be getting stuff that's genuinely good stuff that maybe a lot of people are passing on, but we can see the potential.
Right.
And he's like, well, the problem is I don't have time to do it. And I was like,
right.
I can do this. I can do this. I do this all the time with my grad students, because as a graduate professor, I had a policy that, let's say you were my grad student and you had a project. My policy was, you can turn in your project to me as many times as you want during the semester, and I will review it and give it back to you. So you might turn in a C, but if you're willing to do the work, it could be an A.
Right.
But you can't turn it in after 2 weeks. 2 weeks from the end of the semester, I'm not taking any more, because I don't want people that have done nothing all semester long. They crash it the last, 2 weeks out, and now they want to save their ass. I'm like, no, I want somebody who's willing to work. But the idea is that, when you're doing a literary project, you rarely get it right the first time out of the blocks. You know this as a writer yourself. You know this.
Oh, yeah.
It's in the editing where greatness comes.
Yeah, I always say editing. The art is in the edit.
Absolutely. You might have this. You have a good concept, but it's all about execution of that good concept, and that's where the editing can really make a big difference. So, we started doing that, and we did a lot. Very sadly, in early October of 2018, you probably remember this. Gary Reed passed away.
Right.
And he had a heart attack. I mean, he had gone to the Monroe Comic-Con, Monroe, Michigan. And I remember he wrote on Facebook thanking everybody how much fun he had and how wonderful it was to see all these people. And then that was the last post that he made. He passed away that night. And we lost him, and it was a massive loss. It was a massive loss, because you have all this history, and all this knowledge of comics, and it's gone,
Yeah.
And he had a partner, Eric Reichert. And after, when things calmed down a little bit, we were talking about, what is the future of Caliber? Is it going to continue to exist? And what's going to go on? Eric wanted it to go forward. And I volunteered, to work with him. And that led to me to continue to do, and actually more of the editing, where I was working now, helping to recruit submissions, as well as reviewing what came in. And oftentimes Eric would see ones that had potential, and he knew what I was capable of doing. So he'd send them to me and say, work with this guy. Here's what we need done, get them to that point, and then we'll publish them.
Right.
And so that's what I was doing. I spent 5 years with mostly my editing with Caliber was from 18, the middle part, say, of 18 to 20, to the middle part of 2020. So it was about 2 years of editing with Scout. And then occasionally I helped him out with a couple of things after I left. But after the contract was about to run out, in the course of getting out there and repping, I was going to conventions and repping Scout Caliber. I was because I'm here in Florida, I was bumping into Scout because they're in Fort Myers, and at the time I was in West Palm. So I'm seeing him at MegaCon. I'm seeing him at, all over at various places. And, we're chatting because obviously we're both from Florida. Right. But the more we talk, like, especially with Richard Rivera and with Jim Pruitt, and who, by the way, had history with Caliber. He started at Caliber.
Nice.
And James Hake, of course, primarily with James Hake. The more I talked to James, the more I liked him. And I just felt like we were thinking along the same lines, and I just really, as my contract was coming to an end, they made an offer. They said, why don't you come and work with us at Scout? And I really agonized over it. Barrow, my co-writer and co-creator, my oldest son, was like, Dad, we need to do this. This is a no-brainer. This is, every time we talk with him, we feel like we're on the same exact wavelength. So I listen to my son because as partners, I've learned to listen to him. He's got a good head on his shoulders, and it's been a great move for us. It really has. I mean, I have nothing bad to say about Caliber. Nothing bad to say about Caliber. It's a great, wonderful experience. I'm still friends with Eric Reichert. He's a good guy. But for me, why I wanted to go to Scout is that it was there was a bigger team that you had to work with. And I really like that idea of working with a team. So that's been a real blessing to be with Scout. And now, we signed in July of 2020 and they made me the editorial director. And since that time, since July of 2020, and this is no exaggeration, I can show you the list. I have edited over 140 different IPs with Scout. Wow. And I'm not talking about individual issues here. I'm talking about individual properties, separate properties. So that has been a tremendous amount of work, but I've loved every minute of it. And one of the really cool things is just having a chance to work with creators from all over the world. That has been a tremendous gift because it's not just working with them, but it's building friendships. Like I have just off the top of my head, I've got creators I work with in New Zealand, Australia, Brazil, 3 different creative teams in Brazil, France, Germany, Spain, multiple creators in Spain, multiple creators in Italy, England, Croatia. I was on a call this week with a creative team from Japan.
Nice.
It's an amazing gift, and you see this kind of worldwide love of comics, and the community that is built and the friendships. Where like today on my social media, I thanked one of my artists who's an artist from Spain, and I consider him a friend, not just a guy that I collaborated with, but somebody that I care about. I know about his children. I know about his wife. He's now working with Cullen Bunn on a project with Source Point Press. Nice. And, it's amazing when you see somebody like that and when you first saw their art, you're like, oh yeah, I got to work with this guy now. Because as soon as Marvel and DC find this guy, I'll never be able to afford him again,
Yeah. I got this guy, Donny Hadijawa. I was like, I saw him on DeviantArt and I was like, I got to hire him now before he gets hired out by Marvel DC.
Yeah. But it's exciting to see those guys as your friends. You build up that friendship and you get to watch them grow their career, especially a young man with a young family. And it's just, it's really cool to see, because you want them to succeed. They've got kids, they've got little kids. They're depending on their dad to come through and, you cheer for them. You want them to make it, so it's been an exciting ride. So that kind of answers, it's a long-winded, elaborate answer.
That's fine. But I got a question for you. I mean, you dealing so internationally with so many different heads outside the country. Where do you think is like the outside of obviously the US and maybe Japan and France, where do you think is the other big hot spot of comics?
Well, I mean, you stole my thunder by saying France, because that's the obvious, that's the European, that's, the European creators that I know talk about France being the best market. All of them want their books in the French market.
Gotcha.
So, that's pretty cool. Like in France, they call it la bande dessinée. That's what they would call a comic book. I'm sure Larry already knows that, being from Canada.
Yeah, the albums.
Yeah. So, but that is definitely the best market in Europe. I think Italy is smaller, as is Spain. The creators I've talked to, they have thriving markets, but they're smaller by comparison. I don't know. Like, I've never really talked to my British creators about what the English market is like, but you think about all the great English writers that have impacted the comic book market. It can't be too bad, right? I mean, they've got to be doing something right over there. So, I mean, so I got to believe that England's got to be a pretty good market. I think Australia too. Like we have some pretty good comic book stores that support Scout. D's Comics comes to mind. So I think Australia must be pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, like I said,
Brazil's doing pretty well too. Those guys can play. They can play. Let me tell you.
Mm-hmm.
I think the big trick for the Brazilian market is, of course, it's Portuguese.
Right.
You know, and so you have, if they're going to be better known, they have to also have that original Portuguese manuscript has to be also, you know, translated for the English market, and that can be tricky. Like, this is a little insider baseball, but one of the creators that I would recommend that you pay attention to, all of our creators, we have 3 creative teams, as I mentioned, that I'm aware of from Brazil. Right. One of them is the book, they produced the book Meta. That's Marcelo that does that. He's the writer. And then we have Claire and the Dragons. Wander is the author and artist of that, and that's for Scoot. That's an all ages title. And then the one that I'm working with very closely is Triskele. Triskele is that's Felipe Pan, and Felipe had another book that I really wanted for Scout. And Scout wanted, but because it was originally published in Portuguese, the Brazilian publisher wasn't ready to give up any rights. They didn't want to give up. They didn't want to give up, you know, film rights in English. They wanted to control, and understandably so, because that's where there's potentially a lot of money there. But because they were only willing to give English publication rights, you know. So I say that to kind of illustrate how it can be difficult for some of these more insular markets like Brazil, because it's Portuguese, where it might be more challenging for creators to get better known, you know, in the English speaking world, because they might have to do something specifically for the English speaking world, you know, and then secondarily, you know, kind of back into it to get it published in Portuguese there in Brazil.
Now, here's a question for you. Is Scout helping its creators get its work translated into other languages and published in other countries?
Yes. And we have that. Like, for example, I would use the ones just off the top of my head, and I don't work in this, so this is a limited answer, but the answer is yes. So, for example, we've had Italian creators who they've originally published with us, like Distorted, for example. Distorted was originally published. It's an Italian team publishing in English and then getting the Italian version published in Italy. There's also Broken Eye. These are titles that I've edited, so I'm better aware of them. Broken Eye is a Spanish team, and they wanted to have it obviously published in their own home country. So they originally published it in English with us, but then now it's published in Spanish in Spain. It Eats What Feeds It, for example, is available in French. And I'm sure there's others. Those are those 3 that come to my mind. I know also that they're talking about Stabity Bunny being en français, which I think would be very cool. I studied a number of languages in my academic career, and French was one of the ones that I was best at. And I'm rusty, but I can still read pretty effectively in French. So I think it's cool. And the bottom line is, if a creator wants to get their book published in another language, they can even take the initiative. So let's say, for example, you were with Scout and you had a book and you said, you know, I would really love to get it into the French market. And I happen to have a connection. So you're able to say, hey, through your connection, there's a publisher in France that's interested in publishing my book. All you need to do is get that connection started and then hand it over, and Scout will take it from there. So Scout will do it, you know, on its own, but you can also push the ball down the field. So if you have connections that can help grease the wheels and get it going, Scout is more than happy to have you, you know, help us out with that too. So,
gotcha.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool. I mean, seeing your book in another language, like the Shepherd was published in Italian, and it may come as a surprise that with my last name being Molinari, that's on my father's side for sure, at least. That's the roots, you know, in Italian. So that was very meaningful to me to see my work in Italian.
Yeah. What's funny is I signed Oswald. I have one story signed over to a Chilean company, and they published one of the stories. One of the boatload that I have. So yeah, but and I work every now and again. They contact me. They're like, "Oh, do you want to continue?" And they send me some more money.
Yeah, no, I think it's wonderful. And of course, the sharing of culture, the sharing of language, sharing of stories. I'm all for it. I think, I think it's a good thing because it breeds understanding, and appreciation. So.
It's funny. It's for me, it's like I'm always fascinated by the indie scene in other countries. It's like I always when Daphne and I went to France and we were in Paris, and I remember we were there and we were just going around the city and we were gonna go see some tapestries, some old tapestries in some museum. And we get out of the train station and I see a store and I'm like, oh, look, that's a comic book store. And she looked at me and she was like, no, it's not. And I was like, yes, it is. I said, she's like, no, it's not. I was like, look, the geek door went off. My geek radar went off. That's a comic book store. And then we walked up to her. She's like, oh, yeah, it is. They weren't open yet. And we was like, okay. So we went to the museum and then we came back and we saw this stuff. And it's just like, it's incredible to just see it, just to be there and feel the albums. And what's funny is I thought I was going to come home with a big stack of them. She was the one that came back with a big stack of books. I was like, well, I was like, I got to carry it anyway.
No, I think that I think the European market is very intriguing. One of the things, like I'm close with, as I mentioned, with several of the Spanish creators. One of the ones that I work with is Juan Torres, who did Nancy in Hell for Image. The Veil was originally published with Image. But he was talking about how, like in Spain, it's very typical for them to do these beautiful hardcover volumes, and they're oversized by American standards. Like we think of them as library editions or coffee table editions, but for us, we do them obviously, but they tend to be more exceptional. Whereas for them, it's more regular that they do it in that bigger size. And I was just thinking how cool that is. I love those bigger size books for comics. Like, I think we talked about this before, is that I'm a huge Hellboy fan, huge Mignola fan, not just Hellboy. In fact, some of my favorite Mignola properties are actually the Nook and Cranny ones. Like I'm a big Lobster Johnson guy. I love Baltimore. Baltimore is actually my favorite of even more so than Hellboy. But I bring up Mignola because, I'm thinking of those beautiful library editions. Like I own all of his library editions for Hellboy.
Yeah,
and
I have all
just fabulous. If you've ever read them, they're like, like you can almost hear the angels singing as you're open. It's like, this is how comic books should be. This is an example of what, because it just blows. It just blows up the art. The art is just presented in the most beautiful way possible, and it's just it celebrates the story.
Yeah. But, I mean, I don't know how you feel about it, but they always say, what is it, Marvel, DC, Image, right? I've always felt it's Dark Horse.
Oh yeah.
And then everybody else.
Yeah. No, Dark Horse is of the American publishers that are not named Scout. I have to say this for.
Got you. No, of course I understand. Loyalty is everything.
My favorite, hands down, all day, every day. They just do some amazing stuff. If they did nothing else than Mignola, that would be enough. But they also do some really, they do a lot of really cool stuff. Like they've done some of the civil rights, March, for example, comes to mind. Just lots of really powerful quality stuff. Across the pond, I love Europe Comics. I think Europe Comics just stomps people. That is an amazing publisher. So,
Larry, like I said, loyalty is
really reflects some bias, Larry. Let's be honest. That I'm not saying there's not a lot of good stuff there. There is. I'm just saying, we have to recognize our biases, and there's nothing wrong. We are all biased, but it's we have to recognize those and lay those out there.
No, Larry's a good guy. I love this stuff.
Yeah, he is.
So I want to ask you about Shepherd. What's the genesis? You have your doctorate in, was it theology?
Yeah. Well, early Christian literature and history was really the specialty that I had. The first 4 centuries.
So I mean, how does that factor into your work? How does that come out in Shepherd?
Yeah, well, there are some very direct connections. First of all, I always snickered. Like, you get that look on my face. You'll see that look on my face when people ask about theology and comics, how that comes together. And what I would like to point out to you is that theology is all over comics.
Right.
That my being part of comics is actually incredibly logical. There's lots of influential comics that are heavily influenced by philosophy and theology. And I would just point to Sandman and leave it there. That's all I need. It's just that one as an example. But you could stack them up, DC's Ragman, Spectre, the list goes on. Deadman.
You just talk about Hellboy.
Yeah, Hellboy. Example. It's just over and over. So there's lots of these theological afterlife themes that are, that are rampant in comics and have been, because the human person is interested in these things. I use this as an example. The earliest extant piece of Western literature epic is the Gilgamesh epic. It's a Sumerian epic, and it deals with a superhero. Gilgamesh is a superhero,
right?
And I point this out to people, is like the story begins because he's the king of Ur, which is in modern day Iraq, and he is so strong and so powerful that he's playing with his people, and he hurts them, not intentionally, but it's kind of like, think of Smallville with Clark playing high school football. Imagine what he's capable of doing. So his own people, Gilgamesh's own people, absolutely. Gilgamesh's own people basically pray to the gods to send him a playmate. For the love of God, please give him somebody that he can play with so that he'll leave us the hell alone. So the gods send him Enkidu, and Enkidu is kind of like a super powered Tarzan-like character. He can talk to the animals. He lives out in the wild. He has to be domesticated, but he ends up becoming great friends with Gilgamesh, and they go on all kinds of adventures together. Eventually, they end up pissing off the gods because they get too frisky and do damage to the gods' possessions. And so they end up punishing him by Enkidu ends up dying, and that leads to, by the way, Gilgamesh going into the afterlife in search of immortality. So what I'm telling you is the earliest extant epic in Western literature involves superheroes and the afterlife.
Yeah. Oh, what's funny, I'm familiar with the epic story because of Jim Starlin's Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
And
Scout, by the way, Scout is coming out with a book this year, 2023, called Death Comes for the Toy Maker. Is written by Dakota Brown. Excellent piece of work. We're going to be releasing, I think this week, we're going to be releasing the ash can for that through Scout. So my whole point of telling you is that theology and comics have been hanging out for a very, very long time. So I'm not the beginning of that. That said, I didn't plan, as I said at the beginning of the show, I never planned to be a comic book writer. I mean, I was doing scholarly literature. However, the literature that I specialize in the early church, I did study the New Testament, but I was doing mostly 2nd and 3rd century literature. And the stuff that I specialized in is very fantastical. Like I published 2 books on legends involving the apostles, particularly legends involving Peter.
Right.
And if you go to these books, they're called the Apocryphal Acts of the Apostles. You can Google them and you can read them yourself right online. They involve talking animals. They involve miracles, dramatic miracles, way more dramatic than you would find in the Bible. They involve, like Peter. If you read the Apocryphal Acts of Peter, there's an epic battle between him and Simon Magus, where Simon Magus literally flies through the city of Rome. And Peter prays and knocks him out of the sky. No lie. There are stories, like one of my personal favorites was a story called St. Andrew and the City of the Cannibals. I'll let you guess about what that's about. There's dragons, talking dragons, Philip fighting the dragon, all this kind of stuff. It's all very fantastical. And scholars believe that these books were written in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century and beyond,
right,
for inspiration, but for entertainment as well.
mm-hmm.
So that's the kind of literature that I was studying historically. So for me to transition into working with fantastical comic book literature, it's really isn't much of a transition. So
right,
yeah,
it was a very easy move.
Again, not the plan, but
Mm-hmm.
life takes you on different journeys, and sometimes it's best to just go where life takes you.
Gotcha. All right. So I mean, I pulled this up. This is Shepherd.
Yeah. This is what's coming out in March. Actually, that's the A cover.
Mm-hmm.
This particular story, The Tether, is the first one that is written primarily by my son Roberto. I wrote on it too. I mean, I worked as a secondary author and certainly editor. God knows I spent plenty of time editing. But that particular story is really came out of his imagination. So it's pretty exciting to see that one finally come to fruition. And that's the B cover. That's Jaime Martinez. That's the interior artist who did that one. Nice. The A is done by Luca Merli.
Mm-hmm. And this is a 4-issue limited series or a one shot?
That is a 5-issue, but it's going to be presented in the nonstop format, which is a format that Scout uses where they release issue 1 and you have all the collectability and the variant covers and all that type of thing. And then you go right to the trade. So that is a part of the reason why Scout does that is because, not just with Scout, but pretty much industry wide, you have, as you know, usually your best sales are with issue 1, and then your sales tend to drop dramatically to issue 2. It's sometimes can be 50 to 60% drop. So it, from a cost effectiveness point of view, you have the collectability of the issue 1 with the evergreen quality of the trade. And that's what Scout does with the nonstop. And we've done, like last year, we did individual issues with the Valentine and the Pit. That was volume 3. We did individual issues. And the story after this is planned for individual issues. So we go back and forth.
Gotcha. Now, I mean, I don't know how much you're involved with the marketing, but do you find that with new distributors entering the market, in the comic book market, do you find it maybe getting either easier to reach, to get more product out into the market, or, maybe more retailers coming into the market, making things, maybe grabbing up some of those extra books? I mean, do you see that happening, or do you feel that that's happening?
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to ask that, because I'll be honest, is that any numbers that I get, are usually secondary. So in other words, like you're the writer on one of my creative teams, and you're like, hey, Andrea, could you let me know how my issue 3 is doing? What are the latest numbers on that? I'll ask the publisher and get that information and give it to them. But I don't deal with the sales aspect or the distribution aspect. I mean, my primary function as editorial director is I have 4 editors under me. Right. Each of them has an editorial assignments, lists of books that they work on. And our goal is to, my goal, really quite simply stated, is I'm trying to produce the best product we can, to be consistently excellent in terms of the quality of the storytelling, the quality of the lettering, and make sure that, from a punctuation, editorial, grammar, that we're solid, and just do everything we can to try to make sure the product that we're giving to our readers is the best, highest quality we can give them.
Okay. Well, yeah, no, of course it all makes sense. No, I was just curious. I mean, it's always a thing with me. It's like, I've been self-publishing since 91, 92. And back then we had 13, 14 distributors, right? And you would go through them. And even as an independent, nothing, brand new, nobody knows who you are, you could sell 3,000 to 5,000 books.
Yeah.
Because you were selling them through all these different channels. And there was a beautiful thing of relist. So if you put out your second issue, you could relist in a lot of them. Diamond was never a company that liked to relist books.
Yeah.
And they held true to that one to this day. That's what my understanding, which is a shame, because it's just like, if a retailer runs out, how are they going to get, more copies,
Right.
And I mean, I've always found that to be a little weird, but I mean, they're doing what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
But you could sell those many books. I remember Stephen Bissett. He said he was doing Tyrant, and he saw once the market was going, he was like, because that's what he would do. He would order, I guess, 10,000 or 15,000 of his book. Knew that his issue would sell X, but he'd be able to get rid of X, the rest of that stock in the future months. But once he saw the market, Diamond was going exclusive with everyone, he knew. He was like, oh, this is done. That's one of the reasons why he stopped doing Tyrant, which is a shame.
Yeah. No, I wish it was like that. I don't think that's certainly that market is gone. One of the things that we're doing at Scout, and I know we're not unique, I don't want to give that impression because that is not what I'm trying to imply here, is that we're really exploring Simon & Schuster and the bigger bookstores. So we're not giving up on comic book stores, obviously.
No, of course not.
But what we're learning, and this is really, one of the real blessings, I need to say this, one of the real blessings that Scout has, and I think an advantage that Scout has that maybe other publishers don't have, is James Hake. James Hake is a weapon. And I'll tell you why. James Hake is a money manager in his day job. Okay. So he thinks about things like multiple streams of income. He's constantly thinking in terms of not relying on, Diamond or Lunar, because Diamond and Lunar they're middlemen.
Right.
What do you know about middlemen? I'm not even going to say. If you don't know, you can figure it out for yourself.
Yes.
But they're in business to make money for themselves, not for the product they're distributing. Right. So, and the creators tend to make, like on a given issue, you can be looking at 30 to 39 cents for the creator. So think about how many of those do you need to sell? So I'm just saying is that these are not set up for the creators or publishers necessarily to win. So you have to think about other streams of income. And so one of the streams that, James has really insisted on is, and help negotiate is our deal with Simon & Schuster, which allows us to sell trades in Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Target, Amazon, Costco, other places. And, that is a much broader market. If you think about this, for example, the number of people that go to comic book stores to buy books, as opposed to the number of people who go to Barnes and Noble or to Target or to, Costco or, it's bigger, broader markets to sell your product, and, they at right now, Simon & Schuster doesn't do individual issues. I don't know if they will or they won't, going forward. But right now they don't. They sell the trades. So you're doing your individual issues and some trades at your local comic book store. But the comic book stores are not great markets for trades. Like I'll just speak my own. Like my own home comic book store is Past, Present, and Future Comics in West Palm Beach. Great comic book store. Love the guys. It's a wonderful store. I recommend it. They've got a ton of trades. They have a ton of trades. However, if you go on their shelves, they don't have a lot of copies of any one of those trades. So it's very common for them to have a wonderful variety. But, they may have 2 copies.
Right.
They may. Now, it doesn't mean they can't order more, but I'm just telling you, when they order, they're not saying, oh, Molinari, give us 10 copies of Shepherd #1. Volume 1. That's not how they function, And I don't blame them, because how many trades are out on the market to possibly be sold? And you only have so much shelf space, right?
Yep.
I mean, they're a big store, but come on, So they put out representation, I'm sure, with the strategy of, like, if that gets sold, then we replace it. But obviously, from a publisher's point of view, you're not selling a lot of trades that way. It's a trickle, whereas you could be selling thousands at a time, to the bigger, the bigger bookstores. So I say all that just to say that it's really important as a publisher for us to be thinking in terms of multiple markets, digital, trade market, figuring out, whatnot is a big deal for Scout right now. It's a really big deal. It's an important stream of income. Now it tends to be, if you've been on Whatnot, that it tends to be a lot of collectors, and also comic book store owners. But it's a great market, and especially if you have collectible, variant covers and other, like this is another example of James Hake's brilliance. This right here is it's a tin type plate from the 4-color printing process. And Scout offers these for sale. They're called Pressworks. And as you know, and I'm sure your audience is well aware, when you print on a printing press, you have digital printing, which is one option of printing, but you also have the 4-color printing, which is CMYK. It's you have black, you have magenta, you have cyan or blue, and then you have yellow. And you have these, like they have Turner, and you have these big like aluminum sheets that and they run through this system, and they have the different color of ink, and that ink blended in different ways gives you all the colors that you have obviously in a comic book. Well, each page, I'm doing this wrong here, the other way, that one. Okay. Each page has 4 pieces of tin of different colors. So it can be produced. So that one happens to be the magenta, and that you're seeing behind me of the Pit, the cover of the Pit, cover A. And they sell these as one-of-one collectibles because that cover, there's only one of it, of magenta. There's one black, there's one yellow, there's one blue. But that's it. For that cover, if you want that A cover and you want one of the printer print plates, there's only 4 of them in existence. And there's only ever going to be 4 in existence. So that is, and here's the best part. James was taking a tour of our printer, and he was asking about the process. And he said, as they were describing this 4-color process, how it's done, he said, well, what do you do with these aluminum sheets when you're done? And he said, well, some of them we recycle. Most of them just get thrown away. We jokingly tell James that he's dumpster diving, but he gets these plates now, and they are another product. And if you think about what they really are a piece of history. Like I said, that plate was part of the process of producing the Pit. It's a historical object now. There's only one of it that, and it actually produced all the books of cover A that were produced, went through that. So it's kind of cool, and if you love comics, it can be a really neat collectible, especially if it's a book that you really enjoy, or you're a fan of that particular book. It's it's like having one of those rare variant covers of a book that you love. So.
No, that's funny. I was like, it's unfortunate that I didn't think of it, because I could have. There are definitely some books that I would like to have had, because I've printed a lot of offset over the years.
Well, apparently, from what James told me, is the idea came to him because apparently baseball cards have been doing this for years. Comics haven't, but baseball cards have been doing this kind of collectible, prints and stuff like that for years. So that idea is not like he doesn't claim to be a genius. He's just saying, let's do it for comics. Let's create this product. It's another new product that we can sell. And the beautiful part about it is, as we sell these printer plates, it helps to pay for the cost of printing the book.
Of course.
So it helps the creator get to profitability better. It generates royalties for the creator, which is, as a creator, I'm sure you don't hate that.
No, no, definitely not. No, that's really cool. All right, Andrea, we've been at this for a minute, right? So we're almost at the end, but we're not there just yet. I got a bunch of goofy questions I want to ask you first.
Sure.
I have this goofy questions. I like. There's a segment of that show.
Okay.
The show. But before we get there, please let everybody know where they can find you and your work, sir.
Okay. Like I said before, our website is theshepherdcomic.com. And that's Shepherd, SHEPHERD, not Shepherd, which apparently seems to be an issue, but theshepherd.com is our website. And then, of course, you can find us on Scout Comics. We have a page on Scout Comics, as do all the other books. In terms of social media, I'm most active on Instagram, The Shepherd Comic, and also on Facebook, The Shepherd Comic, and then Twitter is The Shepherd Com.
All right, cool, nice. All right, so, all right, I got some.
All right, so okay. Let's see what these questions are. We'll do our best.
All right, these first two questions I asked for everybody. So, if you had the choice of any artist, living or dead, it doesn't matter. Okay, don't worry about budget. But if you had someone you could pick to do a guest cover for you, who would you get?
Okay, this is a geek, but I would get Caravaggio.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Caravaggio.
Mm-hmm.
So,
all right.
Yep.
All right.
That was probably not the answer you were expecting, but there it is.
Well, listen, I have one guy said Rembrandt, another one said Michelangelo. So
yeah, no, I mean, there's a list of wonderful artists. I mean, I love Monet. I love Van Gogh. I mean, there's oh God, his name always. He actually has a museum in Miami for him. He's got Salvador Dali. I don't know why. Okay. I have this block. I love his work, but it's just for some reason it blocked up on me. So anyway,
that's fine. All right. So now, if you got the golden ticket, and they said, Andre, come up to the big leagues, whatever you want to consider them, and they say choose any IP, either Marvel, DC, Image, doesn't matter. Any one of these companies that you could be you could be the head of, you could write. What would be that IP? What's the project you'd want to work on from one of those companies?
Well, you heard me talk about Magnola, so you know where this is going. Yeah, I would say, I would want the chance to work with Mike Mignola. I wouldn't necessarily have to write it, but I would be thrilled to just work with him editorially. But any of his properties, I love, like I told you, Lobster Johnson, Baltimore, of course, Hellboy. I like his young Hellboy a lot too. I think that's pretty cool in the 50s, and also seeing a more fresh-faced, more idealistic version of Hellboy. Whereas, the older version is a lot harder. He's seen a lot more. So I like the older version too. Don't get me wrong. I like the beer drinking, nacho eating, pancake loving Hellboy. Right. Yeah, Hellboy's good all the way around.
No, I'm actually very I actually enjoy BPRD.
Yeah. It's all. I mean.
Oh yeah. But that one for me, that one's always that's the one I enjoy the most, the BPRD stuff. So the early Guy Davis stuff is awesome. But all right, so now I have some comparatives for you. All right, okay. So I'll softball you with a couple of these that I ask everyone, and then we'll work our way in. All right. Okay. So Captain America or Batman?
When I was younger, it would be Batman. I think Captain America now.
Okay. That's right. Some of these will come a why, not all, but some. Godzilla or Gamera?
Oh, Godzilla, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Bone or Cerebus?
Cerebus.
Okay. Fair. Wally Wood or Al Williamson?
Williamson.
All right. Bram Stoker or Mary Shelley?
Mary Shelley.
Now this one I'll ask you why.
That's a tough one too, but Mary Shelley.
Oh, like I said, why do you choose her?
Well, first of all, I think in that time period, for her to write something like that, it's a lot harder for her to do that than for Bram Stoker to do it. And I also think that in the end, that I think the Frankenstein story is very powerful because to me, I read it as a story of the question of humanity, kind of like asking, for God, the relationship between humanity and God. It's just juxtaposing that same issue between the creator and the created.
Okay, fair enough. Or Kirk or Picard?
Wow, that is, that's another example. That's another example of when I was younger, it would have been James Kirk all day long. But as I got older, I like Picard will get you home. There's a better likelihood of making it with him commanding because he's smart. He's a smarter man. He's just a smarter commander. And I think tactically, at the end of the day, you're going to have a better chance of getting home from your journey with Picard at the helm or sitting in the captain's chair.
Okay, cool. Comics or trade paperbacks?
Ah, boy, I think trades because I like the entire story. I'm a binger. I love, once I get started, I hate having to wait a month to get to the next installment of the story. In fact, when I buy individual copies, if it's a story arc and I know like it's, 5 or 6, I tend to just set them aside and wait till all 6 of them and then read them all. So I create my own trade, so to speak.
Right. All right. No, that's good. Frank Miller or Alan Moore?
Frank Miller.
Okay.
And I like Alan Moore a lot too. I really do. Like his League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I think is very good. I mean, many other things too, but
right. But why do you choose Frank Miller, or why?
I love the way that he uses words. Like he uses words. They're like individual bullets, and he makes every shot count. And I just think that's really cool. In the ancient world, Julius Caesar is kind of like that. Not quite. But I mean, for the ancient world, he would be a good comparison of brevity, but powerful word choice.
Okay, interesting. Lovecraft or Poe?
Poe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
These are great questions. They really are.
Yeah.
I like them. I'm like, wow, that's good stuff.
Well, like I said, what's funny is they're comparatives, right? So I don't really consider them questions. Like because there's no right or wrong answer.
No, there isn't.
Right? There's like, it's just preference. Like, and they have like all kinds of goofy stuff on these pages. Like I have like scads of them. But that's why I'm sitting here. I was like, damn, which one do I ask next? Here you go. Pinhead or Freddy Krueger?
Oh God, those are characters that I don't like either one of them. So I think probably Pinhead because of I feel like the moral questions are more relevant for that one than Freddy Krueger. To me, it's almost pointless. Like, okay, whatever.
I got you. Well, I figure you're a horror guy. Not everybody's.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to be more of a ghost story kind of guy. Like I love Guillermo del Toro's ghost stories. Like in particular, The Devil's Backbone is my favorite of his works. I just think it's amazing. I love those kinds of ghost stories. That's what The Shepherd is doing too. It's ghost stories that, have a reason why the haunting is taking place. Once that's resolved,
Right. All right.
So it's a mystery kind of ghost story kind of thing. Not Scooby-Doo, but I like Scooby-Doo too. So
listen, we always it was some guy in some suit, right?
Yeah, there you
go. Secret Wars or Crisis on Infinite Earths?
I would say Crisis on Infinite Earths. Yeah.
All right. Doctor Strange or John Constantine?
Doctor Strange.
Okay.
Yeah, I like Constantine, but he's a less likable character than Stephen Strange.
Oh, true.
True. I mean, he's not a good friend. Like, if you were going to be friends with one of those guys, I don't think anybody in the audience who's read them would say, "Oh yeah, sign me up to be friends with John Constantine." That's probably not going to be a healthy move for you. You could end up really screwed.
Yeah.
Whereas Stephen Strange, I don't think he would ever leave you. Willingly abandon you. But I could see John doing that.
Right.
Easily.
This is very true. All right, cool. Well, we've done a few of these. So I got a couple more and then we'll wrap this one up.
All right.
Asimov or Heinlein?
Oh, that is a good question. Heinlein, I think.
Okay. Yeah. That's fair. We'll wrap it up with this one. Stan Lee or Jack Kirby?
Jack Kirby.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Why? Why?
Because I think at the end of the day that Stan Lee, and I like Stan Lee, don't get me wrong, but I think at the end of the day, he's a big picture idea guy.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Jack Kirby's the guy who's going to roll up his sleeves and actually take that idea and bang it out of the rock,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I value that. And I regret the fact that I think that comic fans appreciate him, you know, and I think maybe that's the important thing, but I feel like I wish that he would have had a better shake the way that he was treated, you know,
Mm-hmm.
with characters that he really helped to create, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think eventually his family got that settlement, but it's not like he got to enjoy it, right?
But at least, you know,
Yeah.
But I definitely think he deserves a tremendous amount of credit.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, anybody who's seen his artwork, I don't know, it just makes you happy. It's like comics. It's just like the purest. It's like, it makes me think of what comics are in their ideal, you know?
Yeah.
And I love like his perspective thing where you'd have this, I used to get a kick out of that. Just there's something about it that I just thought that was, you know, like they were coming right out at you kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it's the dynamic power of it. It's I remember it took me a while because when I was a kid, I didn't care for the work. But when I got older, I learned how to appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciate it once I got to see his originals.
Mm-hmm.
When you see the pencils, it's just like, wow, like there is something really there. And, you know, sometimes this takes a little time, you know, to develop some taste.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, yeah, an appreciation of it, you know, and also just the hard work that man put in, the tremendous hours and sacrifice, you know, of creating that art. Yeah, it's pretty impressive when you see somebody with a body of work that he did, you know. He's a great artist by any estimation. Putting him, you know, just because he did comics doesn't diminish him as a great artist.
No, not at all. What's funny is, you know, it's crazy. As many books as he had done, or as many comic pages he's produced, what I found insane was that there's a list. Somebody has created a list online where you could find how many pages was done by a particular artist. Kurt Swan actually comes in number one at like 24,000 pages throughout his career, or something along those lines. John Buscema was number two, which I found. You came in, I think, around 18 or like 20.
Wow.
And Jack came in like third at like 18. And I was just like, wow. Like, and you hear these stories about Jack working 6 days a week, 12 hours, 14 hours a day.
Oh, I believe that. Yeah.
You know, so like what was Kurt Swan doing? I was just like, I mean, I know he did every Superman book for years, but I was like, and he did all of them because they said he did all of the spin-offs. He did everything. So I was just like, oof. I mean, talk about impressive. I was like, yeesh. But I mean, God bless those guys.
Absolutely.
So, Andre, thank you for being here. This was awesome.
My pleasure.
You know?
It was fun.
You know, like I said, you're always welcome. So whenever you want to come back, you got something to promote, we'll always be here for you. So thank you so much. Everybody, thank you so much. I'll see you all soon. I'll be back on Sunday with my Sunday show with all my crazy people talking about crazy things and comics and all that good stuff. And have a great night. All right. Thank you, Andre.
All right.